Hello everyone around the world. Welcome. Bienvenidos que Carlos Irfete to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'm your host, Lauren Battistini, color consultant, artist, language learner, and world traveler. Join me each week as I chronicle the most colorful people, places, and experiences I encounter off the beaten path, both near and far. So, let's go. Vámonos, que pame. Well, good morning, everyone from the Woodlands, Texas. Lauren Battistini here. I am sitting in my studio office, again in the Woodlands, and would really like to take this opportunity to, in one of my inaugural episodes here, to introduce you to this podcast, Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'd like to provide you with a little bit of background, history, and context. I've just returned from 5 weeks of travel, solo travel for the most part, in Greece. I was at 4 different islands, and the last 2 weeks of the trip I was in and around Athens. And I had such wonderful, enriching, culturally immersive experiences and gathered up so many conversations and blogs and interviews and met so many amazing people, created a lot of meaningful moments there. And so I thought a good place to start would be for me to tell you about this podcast, define it for you a little bit, and set your expectations so that you understand my aim, my mission, the type of guests I will have on this podcast, and the type of audience I actually hope to reach. So let's dive right in. And I really do not like to follow a tight script. I always have outlined points that I want to cover. So bear with me and know that this will not be perfectly polished. It will be a conversational type of podcast. So first, let's define it. I didn't even really want to call this a podcast at first. Essentially, I'm chronicling the most colorful, as I say, colorful people, places, stories, experiences, and travels the world over. People, paths, and experiences off the beaten path. As I travel the world, I would love to interview people, and I have, who share my enthusiasm for international, cultural, and even entrepreneurial type living. I want to share interesting stories and places that travelers may not have found on their own, or at least not to be found in any official tourist publication. So this podcast is an extension of a hashtag I created a few years ago. The hashtag was Coloring My Way Across the Globe. And it essentially is this blending of my passion for travel, art, language learning, people, culture, customs, architecture, and creativity and entrepreneurship. It's all of that blended into one. And so this podcast really resides at the intersection of all these things I love in life, honestly. And yes, this is a passion project of sorts, but it's also a portal to my world. This world that recently has just become much more interesting, globally focused, and more so with each passing year. My explorations have only just begun, friends. And I want you along for the ride. And I think another reason I created this podcast is because so many of my friends have either commented on social media or in real life when I see them, and they've said, Lauren, you look like you're having so much fun. I want to go to Greece too. And I start receiving a whole bunch of questions and inquiries and feedback on my travels, and people are fascinated. And so this really was one of the motivations for starting the podcast. Let's go back for a moment, though, to the origins. I mentioned this hashtag that I created. So this is a hashtag I started using on social media maybe 3 to 4 years ago. Just simply hashtag coloring my way across the globe. And at the time I was trying to really define my purpose in posting things on social media, because what I was posting was sort of all over the map, literally and figuratively. A lot of photography, aerial photography, art that I created based on my travels, specifically to Greece at the time. I was documenting through videos some of my Greek language learning and really capturing a lot of these, I'm going to say, travel and cultural moments. And I just wanted to share this with everybody. So again, I created this hashtag, not knowing what it would mean later, not knowing how it would evolve, but knowing I needed to somehow capture all of my interests in this hashtag. And earlier in the year, I started to create some blog posts on my color website, lfbcolor.com, which is where I've traditionally done a lot of architectural color consulting. Well, now I'm merging over into this world, this very colorful world of global travel and that sort of thing. And so a lot of my blog posts have the title Coloring My Way Across the Globe. And I've begun documenting through my blog some of my travels and some of these experiences and sharing a lot of beautiful photography along the way. So I had the epiphany to capture a lot of these, in addition to the photography, to capture a lot of these cultural conversations I'm having in the form of a podcast. Because you guys, I talk to people all day long, wherever I go, even if I don't know the language fully. People, cultures, different customs, colloquialisms, local language, all of these things are so fascinating to me. And so I'm always talking to people. Their stories to me are very informative, highly engaging. And so, I thought as I'm having all of these conversations, why not share these with my friends and an extended audience one day?
You're listening to Coloring My Way Across the Globe with Lauren Battistini. For more information, check out lfbcolor.com.
Everybody loves a good story. And it seems that through this podcast, I'm just becoming a storyteller. So as we speak today, I've already done several podcast interviews, and a few of them will be released at the same time that this episode is released. And I'm very jazzed about this. So let's talk about my guests, the type of people I'll invite to the show or the podcast. So I have them kind of listed out in categories. Being a professional color consultant myself, and being fascinated by this world and understanding that color encompasses so many different industries, a lot of my guests will have some ties to the color industry or to the color community. And these are going to be very engaging conversations, I can assure you. I will also be interviewing digital nomads, people who work in various industries but have made their life what I'll call location independent. They're able to work from anywhere in the world. I also will be interviewing travel experts, content creators, travel influencers, even other tourists I meet along the way. In fact, one of my guests, I can't wait, I met her and her family as I was traveling with my son in Japan earlier in the year. And I found out just in conversation at this little hole-in-the-wall place that we were eating at in Tokyo, found out that she and her husband are both travel influencers in the luxury travel space. So she will be one of my guests as well. Other guests I will have might even be Airbnb hosts. I tend to make friends with my hosts, and I think that they are lovely people, so I always like to understand their backstory and how they got started in business. They usually have very good cultural and travel tips as well. I have in my lineup a wine sommelier from a different part of the world. I will not announce yet. I have internationally known artists, and it runs the gamut. Basically, I will have a combination of some higher profile guests and then other guests who maybe kind of fly under the radar or who are not as well known in their industry, but who I find to be fascinating because I've had conversations with them. So that the diversity of my guests, though, is going to be a characteristic and a hallmark of this podcast for sure. And I really would like to think of this as a conversation between two friends whenever I sit down to interview somebody, and you, my audience, are being let in on the great conversation. So through this podcast, and actually through my guests, because I find them to be so inspiring, I want to inspire, encourage, and teach you all to have the most colorful, culturally immersive experiences, both in your own city and in your travels abroad. So let's talk about the format of the show, of the podcast. I keep calling it a show. Is it a show, or is it a podcast, or is it a conversation? It's technically a podcast. So I really don't like things that are terribly scripted. I want things to seem like they flow as a natural conversation. There will be some ums and ahs and pauses, and that's just natural conversation. So I will, again, have an outline, and my guests will be given a list of questions that I've thought out and investigated and kind of prepared well in advance. But it will be very much conversational. And I've been known to travel to certain destinations just to interview guests. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm flying to interview a very special guest. You'll hear from her soon. And no guests will be paying to be on my show. This is not anything where there's an exchange of money. These are people who I find fascinating. I've researched them. I really want them on my show, and I want you to hear from them. So in the future, any type of sponsorships that evolve from this podcast, they will not be paid out of pocket by my guests. And I really want to make that clear. So each episode in some way will educate, inform, and hopefully inspire you to think more creatively and openly about the world around you. This is a global type of conversation and a global, very colorful perspective that we're presenting each week. And another note, because I really hope to grow my audience beyond just people here in the United States or people whose first language is English, I am being very deliberate about speaking clearly, more slowly than I normally would. I'm enunciating my words properly, and I'm avoiding the use of too many of my, I'll call them Southern expressions or colloquialisms, things that would be difficult for a non-native English speaker to understand. My mission is to expand my audience here, and a lot of those listeners may not speak English as a native language. You are listening to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. Stories of the most colorful people, places, and experiences off the beaten path, both near and far, as hosted by myself, Lauren Battistini. Each week, I'll be interviewing color professionals, artists, world travelers, language learning experts, digital nomads, other entrepreneurs, creative professionals, visionaries. There's something here for everyone interested in the world around them. Keep listening, there's more to follow. What else can I tell you? Episodes are typically going to run between 30 and 40 minutes, although if I have just an amazingly engaging conversation and it's going past 45 minutes, we are going to roll with it, ladies and gentlemen. So, who is my audience? I also want to discuss this. My audience is really not determined by me. It's going to be determined by you, the listeners, who you share my podcast with. I'm imagining that from the onset, my listeners are typically going to be friends and family, and then people based right here in the United States, people I know, they hear about the podcast, people who are US-based travelers, interested in expanding their world, interested in learning languages perhaps, traveling more, wanting to know kind of where to start and what destinations to visit. People like that were probably going to be my initial audience. But eventually, I would really love to use this platform to connect people from all over the planet with a shared love of color, travel, and adventure. I really do envision this global audience who would return to my podcast each week to listen to very colorful chronicles and expand their own horizons in appreciation for other different, distinct people groups, cultures, customs, languages, and destinations the globe over. And this really leads me to my final point for today's podcast, which is I want to discuss the mission of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. And those of you who really know me personally know that I absolutely love people. I consider myself to be very multicultural. I come from New Orleans, Louisiana, a very culturally blended place. I myself am of blended heritage. Of course, I'm third generation U.S. American, but I'm of Spaniard, Italian, a little bit of French and Scottish heritage. And I'm always fascinated by people's heritage, their backgrounds, the languages they speak, why they speak those languages. So I want to talk about my mission with Coloring My Way Across the Globe. And those of you, again, who know me, this will make sense to you. The first mission, it's kind of trifold. It's to inspire, encourage, and teach. The first part of the mission is to inspire you, my listeners, to explore, expand your mental and physical horizons, take up a new hobby maybe, learn a new language, do something that expands and enriches your life in a positive way. And it could even be something you've always dreamed of doing, but have just not had the courage to do. So I want to inspire you through the way that I'm living my life and I'm expanding my own horizons. Secondly, I really want to encourage you along the way to plan your own colorful adventures, whether near or far. This could be a road trip an hour away. It could be flying to Morocco because you've just been wanting to go for the last 10 years. It could mean starting a business. It could mean any number of things. But my job really, I think, is to encourage you along the way personally and through my guests. engaging in insightful wisdom, encourage you to carve out a path for yourself and to explore a little bit more. And I do handpick these guests, and I ask them a lot of very specific questions about how they lead colorful lives. That's one of my main questions I ask is, what does living a colorful life mean to you, and how do you make your lives colorful? And then the third piece of my mission is to teach. It's to teach you how to plan and map out your own travels. And I will be, of course, covering multiple topics, but this really is a colorful travel-focused podcast. And so I will definitely be discussing my own travel experiences, some funny anecdotes, funny stories from planning trips to booking Airbnbs, to navigating train systems, language barriers, even some funny stories. And in fact, I'll have some guests on here who are family and friends who have been brave enough to travel with me on some of these trips. So again, my mission is threefold here at Coloring My Way Across the Globe. That is to inspire and encourage and to teach you. And I hope that each week you'll tune in. I would really value your feedback. You are welcome to subscribe to my newsletter at www.lfbcolor.com. That's www.l as in Lauren, f as in Frank, b as in boy, color.com. And that's color spelled COLOR. You are also always welcome to email me with any questions, Lauren, LAUREN, at lfbcolor.com, or you can simply place comments. A great place to reach me also is through Instagram, where I share a lot of photography and video of my language learning process, a lot of my personal photography stash from my travels, as well as a lot of my artwork. So I am just so thrilled and excited and enthused about this journey that we will go on together, coloring our way across the globe together. And that can mean something right here in Houston, Texas, all the way to the farthest reaches of the continent of Africa. So thank you all again for tuning in today, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue each week with you and interviewing some of the most amazing guests. Thank you guys. Take care. And again, welcome to the podcast. Welcome. Bienvenidos. Que Carlos Irthate to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. Bye, guys. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and we would love to stay connected with you throughout the week. The best way to connect is by subscribing to our newsletter at www.lfbcolor.com. That's www.l as in Lauren, f as in Frank, b as in boy, color, COLOR.com. Also, you may find us on Instagram using the same handle, LFBcolor, for the latest stories, podcast guest profiles, travel photography, language learning diaries, and my own colorful art. Hope to see you there, friends. Thank you again.